everybody, and welcome to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro, recording from the home studio here, getting over being sick. So thankfully, have been doing quite a bit of reading, except for the first few days. That was a little rough. So, anyway, stay tuned. We're going to be checking in with Margaret for a moment with Margaret. She is in California right now, and she's going to be giving some recommendations and reflections on both memoirs and some books that kind of read like memoirs, but that are novels. So, speaking of, it is time to turn our attention to Bright Burning Things, released in December of 2021. And it got a lot of buzz, I'm sure. If you haven't read it yet, that you've heard about it. It was a Today Show book club pick, and it is a really remarkable book. So, the novelist is joining us today, Lisa Harding. Lisa, you are in Ireland, as I understand. So, we are about 8 hours apart, a world apart. But boy, this story certainly makes me feel connected to you because it is the kind of story and the kind of characters that stay with you, I think, for a lifetime. So, congratulations on writing a beautiful book.
Thank you, Olivia. It's a real honor to be here with you today. Thank you for having a chat with me. And you look great,
Uh,
even though you've been really ill.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. For those who are listening to this podcast right now, or watching this video and have not yet read Bright Burning Things, I want you to tell us about Sonya and tell us about the characters and what motivated you to write this story that just feels so raw. And I mean, it really it is I'm at a lack of words for describing sort of the way in which your writing and the way that you tell this story puts us in this headspace of your character Sonya, and the emotional roller coaster that really takes the reader on.
Well, thank you for those kind words. So Bright Burning Things tells the story of Sonya, a former actress who's a single mother. She has a little 4-year-old. He's on the cusp of turning 5. She's on her own. And she's in the grip of a ferocious addiction to alcohol when we meet her. And she's actually so ill with the alcoholism at this point that she kind of goes into these manic phases. And the novel opens with her in a moment of mania. And within that space, there's actually quite a lot of magic for the little boy, but it's also very dangerous. So there's a huge amount of love between the two characters, but it's the danger of isolation. And I think, people are talking about it now in the context of what's just passed or is still going on, but in a different way, the pandemic, that people that are very isolated, lacking supports, turning to a substance. And my character has a highly addictive personality, and I know all about that headspace. And she latches on to different things. It's her acting at one phase, it's men at another point, and then when she finds herself without her career and she's nowhere to put that kind of charge, that creative charge, she turns to alcohol initially to try to soothe herself and also try to recreate the highs of the performing. But because she's such an addictive character, and also it's a chemical issue with her, it really doesn't take long before the alcohol has taken her over. There's very little of Sonya left when we meet her, apart from the actress, which is very theatrical, and she's rather wonderful. I mean, a lot of readers find her, she's tricky, as you know, very spiky, very raw, very unfiltered. And I mean, I guess, this is something that's really affected my life, addiction, in all forms, and loving people with alcoholism, and just watching how, despite somebody's better instincts, and their desire to do one thing, to do something that's good, the addiction takes over, and she finds herself acting in ways that really shocks her. And thankfully, she's still, she's not fully covered in denial. So there's a part of Sonia that really sees the effect she's having on her little boy. And that's why she wants to, yeah, she wants to get better for him. But it isn't a classic tale of recovery, as you know. It's not the classic, somebody gets sober and it's all, I mean, is it ever anyway? It's never wrapped up in a bow like that, is it? It's quite complex. And she's a very contrary, complex, contradictory, spiky character.
Spiky is a good word. I mean, she obviously has tremendous charisma, and she is
Mm.
obviously very bright. And she has a creative spark to her that she feels is kind of in contrast to the world and the dullness of the world. And so I wavered as I was reading her story. Is it really, and I guess the two things are always intertwined. Is it a story of addiction, or is it a story of just a mental illness that
Mm,
would exist, and these episodes would exist with or without the alcohol, or with or without any other substance? And it's also fundamentally a gutting story about motherhood and the pressures of it and the fragility
mm,
of the relationship. And I, as a mom, the little boy is 9 years old, I've always sort of grappled with, I think maybe because I became a mom later in life, and I wanted it so much, I've sort of been shook by the gravity of the responsibility, and how every single choice you make and every scenario you create in memory that's imprinting on them is shaping them in some profound way, and are you messing them up at every turn? And the anxiety that I had while reading this story, and by listening to it also, I was going back and forth between it on my Kindle and the audio. The stress levels for the reader are so high, especially if you come in with the experience of the pressures of motherhood. So how did you create some of these moments, and how emotionally did you sort of get out of that space when you put the writing down? Because we are really in fear for him nonstop.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. So I, believe it or not, I spent 3 years with this book, even though it feels like a kind of a, a first raw, unfiltered kind of monologue. And to be honest, there is a lot of that energy. Like, I think the first 6 months, a lot of it came out of me, but I did work it and rework it and kind of calibrate it. And it was very, very dark in the first instance, too dark. It was unpalatable. And I was initially, I thought I was going to write it from the perspective of the boy. And what then Shuggy Bang came into the world, obviously, and came into the world. We were both writing concurrently, interestingly, about the same dynamic. But I had at that point decided that actually, for me, it was more, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but compelling to really inhabit the headspace of an alcoholic mother, because it's still quite a taboo. It was easier for me to write it from the other side, somebody watching, or the child that is affected. Not easier, but it's very difficult to really inhabit that head space. And as you said about mental illness, I think, in my experience, and there's a lot of addiction in my family, there's always some kind of dual diagnosis, right? Now, whether it's chicken and egg, so whether the alcohol abuse and what it does to the brain is triggering this kind of mania. But she definitely was able to manage her impulses as an actress, because she was always highly charged, highly strung, but she had a place to put that charge. And actually, as is often the case, it does stem from some kind of trauma. Often, I say, not always, but certainly in Sonia's case, there's a lot of childhood trauma, and it's unconscious, and it's the kind of the unconscious that feeds all her bad behavior in a way. The stuff that she's out of control, because her unconscious is where all that trauma is buried. And the trauma, in effect, was she lost her mum very young, and she doesn't remember her. And then her father lied to her, and nobody ever spoke to her, so she wasn't mothered. And that was an interesting thing to write as well. How do you mother when you don't know what it is to be mothered? She has no memory of being held, no memory of feeling safe in the world. So that was kind of my starting point as well. What do you do? And this poor woman, she has no support. And I know quite a few readers really, really don't like her. And I think, I just kind of hope people will stick with her, because that I really didn't want to sugarcoat her behavior, but you have to stick with her, because there is a human being. It's like, it's so easy to judge anybody who's in extreme behavior, isn't it? Particularly an addict who's putting their child at risk.
Mhm.
And she is, and she really doesn't want to.
Well, yeah, she doesn't want to, and you know that she is without question absolutely loves her boy, and
Mm,
can't put herself in a mindset where she understands how much harm and how much he's missing out on by not being able to be the child. So they fall into a dynamic in many ways where he is learning to take care of her and knows when to bring her water or whatever, when, to deal with her hangover, or to remind her, or even ask her. I mean, he's even has the maturity, sadly, been like so thrust into adulthood, to even kind of try to intervene before she starts drinking, and try to kind of step in to keep her from going to the place that he knows is unsafe. And I think that for the reader, thinking about that little boy having to evolve in that way is just so heartbreaking. And the reality is, we know that this is reality for millions of kids probably around the
Mm-hmm.
world.
Mm-hmm. And I couldn't stop thinking about it during the pandemic, because I know in Ireland anyway, there was so much increase in incidence of addiction and different abuses to different substances, and there was an awful lot of phone calls to Childline here, and Women's Aid, and so that it just, yeah, I think when you put somebody under pressure and you add in isolation, and then you add in trauma that's not being dealt with, and it's a lack of support. But I think Sonya, he is, as children of alcoholics do, become little adults way too soon. But I think that there's a redeeming part to Sonya, and that is that every so often her denial lifts, and it's when the denial lifts that she can see him. She has moments of seeing him and thinking, you're not safe with me. And that's kind of agony for her. And then when she sees he's not safe with me, she drinks because she can't sit with that feeling. So it's that vicious cycle. Yeah, so she's lucky that there's an intervention, although the place she's sent to isn't the most progressive. Yeah, it's stuck kind of back in the 1950s, although these places exist in Ireland today, these rehabs
And
that I
I
wrote
wanted
about.
to hear about that from you, because from the reader coming from the States, I almost thought, okay, so wait, am I unaware, because we're so wrapped up in Sonia's mind, and caught up in the story? I thought, am I unaware of a time period change? Because this seems like something that is more antiquated, it being going away to a rehab that is run by a
Yeah.
church in essence.
Mm.
And so, but that's still, those are still programs that are offered, right?
Yeah, well, also, if you don't have any money, and Sonia, although she's middle class, she's no money, and her father, he's not supporting her. Um, so yeah, the only free rehab in Ireland is run by religious institutions, and I've lots of experience at these places. And they're quite extraordinary. They feel like they're stuck in the 1950s. Everybody's made say the rosary, and it's all 12 step. It's all about a spiritual recovery. Now, I didn't want to totally denigrate these places, because they offer succor, and they offer, they'll take people off the streets. They take people coming out of prison. There's an awful lot of goodness and good heart attached to them, but there's no psychiatric assessment. There's no trained psychologist. There's no, it's all this kind of one size fits all. So you put a character like Sonya, a personality like Sonya, who, as you say, is very intelligent, and kind of a one of a kind, into this environment, and she's expected to. It's so rigid, and she doesn't understand. She doesn't have a concept of prayer. But I mean, we all know that recovery does involve some spiritual reconnection or connection, and she does get glimpses of what that means. And there does happen to be one lovely nun in there, which um, they're not all awful and cantankerous. And Sister Anne is pretty progressive, and she does care. It's just she's not a trained psychologist. But yeah, there's great characters in those places. I mean, and Sonia
No,
meets
it's
some of them.
She sure does. And I mean, of course, her being probably the most, one of the most interesting characters that they would be able to meet. I wonder, as you talk about sort of having a family history and a life history with having to deal with the fallout of addiction and recovery and all of that. Is this book a love letter to those who have gone through this? Is this a spotlight on the reality of it? Is this something that you had to explain or get permission to tell this story? from anybody in your life, or what were you hoping that other people could be learning from this story based on what you have witnessed and,
So,
and
well,
and been through
yeah,
yourself?
so I chose, as you know, it's a novel, right? So I didn't write memoir, and that's an important distinction. So Sonya is a composite of many, many different people in my life and aspects of me and my imagination. So, um, but the universal experience of addiction, yes, I really wanted to. I guess, people, it's very difficult to understand that willful, it seems like willful behavior that's so self-destructive and also destructive to those around you. And I think ultimately it became a love poem, as you say, or a love story between Sonia and her little boy. And it is a testament to the power of love, not in any kind of Hollywood way, because I don't wrap it up. And and I don't believe in that either, because it's a very, very tough. Um, I guess people call it so many different things, as disease, um, and dis-ease, or is it just a way of coping with trauma? I think, in my experience, I've seen that. And then it's a chemical addiction, isn't it? But I wanted to really get in there and really kind of inhabit the complexities of it. So it's too easy to judge, from the outside, I think. And if I had written it all from the little boy's perspective, we would not really understand her, and yeah, like the alcoholic brain. It's just, and I think you probably remember, like I used a lot of imagery, like she has, she gets a lot of anxiety. She's got really high anxiety, and she feels like she always has these little creatures fluttering in her chest, and her little boy calls it the blackbirds of worry. There's all this, a lot of bird imagery and a lot of wings, and because it does feel like a possession at its worst, where somebody's just not in charge at all.
Yeah, it is. It's just so effective because it really just, as a reader or listener, you're completely taken away by what is going on with her. And I find it to be, I mean, what we think of is so powerful and beautiful about reading is the empathy that it can give you, plopping you in somebody else's life, in their heart, in their mind, in their shoes, to experience this. And this, we are experiencing a very terrifying, out of control moment in time in her life, but we are
Mm,
also experiencing the fact that she would love to be a wonderful mother who is
mm,
able to still create magic and have a unique quality to her life, and still, possess the glittery fairy dust type of persona that she envisions as an actress. And it made me think a lot about motherhood in general, and sort of this audience that we have in our own households. And
mm,
it does parallel very much, this, have we been quarantined and sort of amplified what's going on in our household. But in general, as a parent, you have an audience, and they're constantly watching you, and so everything you do is elevated and amplified to their psyche in the most profound way, whether it's the great memories or the tough memories, who they want to be, what they don't want to be. And so I
mm.
just thought it was a profound look at humanity and just the flaws that we all bring into relationships, because we all want to be amazing, and we just don't necessarily have the skills to do so.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that, about yeah, the magic of her personality. I think, like, what my wish for her obviously is that somehow she needs to express that creative side of her. She can't, and I never ever would use this language, just a mother, ever. But Sonia, it's such an integral part of her. She will be in trouble if she doesn't get back on stage. And that's my wish for her, is that somehow she can balance, you know, being that actress and being a mother. But yeah, I mean, there's some great scenes. Like, I loved writing the stuff where she's actually acting out Shakespeare with her little boy, and she teaches him, and he gets it all wrong, but she still adores, acting and language and words and, yeah, poetry. And she has her rescue dog as well. Her love for her dog she treats like another little boy. But they're this funny little trio. There is, I don't know if it's very Irish, but there's a certain humor in it that I know some readers are not picking up and some readers are finding it funny, because she is funny. I mean, I find her quite charming and funny, as well as terrifying and awful, all of it. But there's yeah, that was my hope, that somehow that final scene kind of pointed to, perhaps they can have this, she won't lose all her magic by getting sober, but she can still touch into those parts that are slightly she won't, yeah, slightly elevated, shall we say, heightened. But she'll never be completely grounded and baking scones in the kitchen. She'll try, but she'll burn them.
She'll burn the kitchen down. Um, this obviously is the kind of book, based upon what you're bringing to it, or based upon what moment in time you find it, that can be obviously very triggering, very emotionally real, for a lot of people, and it's a credit to your writing. But first of all, have you been surprised by, or how have you received all of the attention, number one, that this book has got? I mean, you're in Ireland, and then on the Today Show they're announcing this is the book club, and I mean, this is this huge audience that you've got for this incredible story. So how has this journey been for you, and are readers receiving it in the way that you expected?
Well, quite extraordinary for me, because I've only written one other novel before this, and I've written two novels that were very intense, very interior, not written really at all with any sense of the commercial viability. And my agent's great like that, she really encouraged you to write from the heart. And after that, it's completely out of your hands. I did not think this book was going to reach a wide audience at all. In fact, it was a difficult book to sell initially. Both my editors in Bloomsbury in the UK and Harper Via in the US fell in love, and it took that, it took an editor to actually fall in love with the character of Sonya to actually take a risk on putting it into the world. So yeah, pretty extraordinary that Jenna then took it up. And I mean, I'm still kind of yeah, I mean, I'm here in Dublin. I haven't got over to America, so it all feels quite, it feels quite surreal. It feels really wonderful. And I love that there is such a variety in literature, and, particularly in America, that people are open to this kind of interior, immersive, intense, I guess, reading experience. So I'm loving it, obviously. But the readers, so the critics have unanimously loved the book, right? It's been wonderfully received, and there was a lovely review in the New York Times this weekend, wonderful. And the Guardian and the Observer, they've all been fabulous, but the readers have been split, and I'm not surprised. And in one sense, it's kind of a mark. I'd never write to alienate a reader, but I think I did my job well, I feel, because some readers are so triggered, as you say, and actually really just, I mean, it's sad when a reader can't stick with it, but I understand it, perhaps. And this, it's triggering, it's affecting people, and it's getting a lot of love, or I couldn't stick with it. So it's funny, because I'm writing my third novel now, and I am thinking a little bit about that now, I don't want to kind of water down or dilute my writing. I don't want to do that for the audience, but I also don't want to alienate readers too much. So it's a fine balance, isn't it? But I think you
Well, now,
find your readers.
yeah, well, also with I imagine, I always imagine that, with the commercial success comes just a different sort of level of pressure, or something that you, I'm sure, as a creative person, want to be able to put aside wholly when you sit down to create your art, but
Mm.
you just can't, because it's
Well,
happened.
I have a wonderful agent, and her name is Claire Alexander. She's in London, and she's very nurturing of the creative process. So she absolutely is not about the commercial hit, if you know what I mean. That's not her focus, and I think that's really great for a creative artist. And then yet she does have quite a lot of, I think, writers that do have very big commercial successes, but she would never train me to think that way. She would be worried that you'd lose some of your essence. So if she sees that I'm kind of slightly I don't know what is the word, diluting maybe. Um, yeah, or trying to make something more palatable. She was, she will actually kind of call me out on it because I am a raw writer, and I guess that's the power of what I do. There's a voice. So,
Is there something inherent in the, I mean, the Irish culture? My husband is Irish and Italian. So of course, we
okay.
in the States, think of the Irish as good storytellers and, roll our eyes. It's like that's the Irish part of him when he's telling a tale that he's exaggerating or,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
The person who can talk to anybody and strike up a funny conversation, has a tale for everything. But obviously with the success of this book, with Sally Rooney, I mean, there are is there an element to just the culture that makes maybe your stories coming from this part of the world so interesting and engaging for the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't think either Sally or I are particularly, I mean, well, Sally's in a whole other league, but that's super. She's not particularly about story, Sally, is she? It's more, she's a very intellectual writer, and there's a lot of that coming out of Ireland. What's extraordinary about Ireland is that every second person writes, right? And also, apart from, you're right, like the tradition of storytelling, but I think aside from that, people are in love with language. So there's a lot of care, given to the level of the sentence and how words sound. And for me, that's really important because I was an actress and I did do Shakespeare and I love language. And you know, although Bright Burning Things feels incredibly raw and it feels like, as you say, it could have been, it probably has the feel of a first draft. I did work each sentence, really, really worked it kind of to the bone. I think we're a lover of, yeah, story and also language.
Mhm.
And then there's a great, like with the Russians, there's a great melancholy in Ireland too. Yes, there's a sense of humor, but there is a great, I wonder, is it because of all the trauma in our past? It's dark here. There's a lot of alcoholism, so it's a good mix, isn't it? It's where a lot of the drama comes
The
from.
lyrical quality to the words and just to listen to you speak also, I think that makes its way both to the page and of course to listening to the audio. I do want to talk to you about you going into the booth to perform this book that you had created. I mean, what was that experience like? It must have been, I mean, because as you mentioned, especially with these manic episodes, it has a stream of consciousness quality. It's got to have been, I feel like you probably must have come out after an hour and thrown yourself on the floor. I mean, that must have been
Yes.
incredibly exhaustive.
It was exhausting, and it was quite funny as well because I had this awful breakup right just before. I was heartbroken and I had to go in there and do this character, and it was so raw, like it was literally a few days, and I was, so it's kind of reeling. And then I know the producer in the radio station, that he was there recording it with me, and he was like, "Whoa, Lisa, slow down." And I said, "No, she's manic." And he was like, "Nobody's going to be able to understand you because you've probably heard, like, at the beginning she's in mania." So I went at it like it was kind of like a Beckett play or something. So he was like, "Oh my God, you can't keep this up." And you're right, I did throw myself down on the couch every hour and a half or something. Um, but he just gave me lots of tea and biscuits and cake, and but she wasn't the best to be with for a broken heart. She wasn't the most soothing, comforting thing to be delving back into. But it might have helped that I was feeling so raw. Yeah, I
Have. I
think.
mean, I would not be surprised if, I mean, your performance itself certainly like award deserving because it was really, it was really phenomenal. And it was, I mean, it was fantastic. So for that reason, especially I did not want to refer to your acting careers in the past because the fact that you were able to bring that much life and that much emotion and stress and true mania into your reading of your work was just out of this world.
Thank you. And I know that that also puts some people off. People aren't used to that. I think, people are listening to it thinking, oh, I'm going to do my ironing now, and I'm going to, I'm going to just, I don't know, rearrange my books. And the way people use books to relax. And I know some people on Audible just were like, oh my God, what was this? I couldn't listen to it. So, um, yeah, it's an interesting book. All right. I'm delighted. I'm delighted people are, engaging with it. And thank you for this chat today. And I love the fact that you loved it. Definitely it's not for everybody, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And no meaningful book is, because if I mean, there are a lot of books that we use to escape that are fun or romantic or whatever, but the books that stay with you, the books that mean something to you, the books that shake you up on the inside and make you feel all sorts of ways, and
Mm.
sometimes that's a bad feeling or sad feeling or mad feeling or fear. I mean, I felt fearful and stressed and introspective and, anxious and worried and hopeful and every emotion pretty much that I could think of besides chilled out, during the course of this book.
Sorry.
I wasn't relaxed, so let's just say that, but I felt pretty
No.
much everything else. And so, I mean, that to me is what going on a journey with a book is all about. So, Lisa, as we wrap up, let me just ask you, every time we talk to a writer, I want to kind of know when they really fell in love with books. And so I imagine, I think of every writer as being a reader. I think of every reader as secretly dreaming of being a writer. And so when do you remember first realizing that there was some magic in those pages and maybe that was a future for you?
No, well, I didn't, to be honest, I didn't think there was a future in it for me. I had confidence issues around writing, I think because I was an actress for so long, so I was so used to speaking other people's words. But I always read, yeah. And I think I used it, when I was little, there was a lot of stress in our house, so I used it to escape. And I loved Winnie the Pooh, and I loved Alice in Wonderland, and I loved Narnia, and I was lucky because I always had that little place to go to. And the world of the imagination was always, even the scary bits, even when when you're really young and you're reading the scary Hansel and Gretel, or um, they still transport you somewhere. And yeah, I was an avid reader all my life, but I didn't have the confidence. I used to think that people who wrote novels were extraordinarily um, intelligent and kind of intellectual, and it was a different thing. You look at someone like Anne Enright, our Irish Booker Prize winner, and I always had that thing of comparing myself. And then over time I started to write plays, and I thought, no, you do have a voice, and just go with it and just let what comes out come out naturally. But I didn't start writing till I was 40 professionally. So, that's nice for people to hear as well. You can come, and I now teach, and I have students who are in their 60s and 70s who've retired, and they're really gifted and talented, and it's lovely. It's one of those things you can do at any point in your life, isn't it?
Yeah,
You can come
that's
to it at any
beautiful.
stage. Yeah.
It
And
gives
I
gives you
love teaching people, who are a bit later in life, who are rediscovering that part of themselves. It's fantastic. So
you have more stories to tell, right? You've got more to shape the way that
absolutely.
you're.
Yeah, we have more perspective as well, and maturity, and yeah, empathy, and all those compassion, all those things. Yeah.
Lisa, just something you said. I have one more question for you. As um, thinking about this book in particular, and I imagine that you identify with all the voices that we're hearing in this story. But do you did you see yourself more? Were you more in the space of the son or of Sonya?
Initially the son,
Mhm.
and then as I continued to write Sonya, I felt like I was kind of living in both of them, to be honest. Sonia is probably the child of an alcoholic. I mean, my sense was what I didn't want to do was, and I know this irritated some readers, but I didn't want to give. I wanted to live in the moment with Sonia. Sonia's memories are blurred, and that is the nature of trauma. So I think Sonia's mother definitely had mental health issues. I think she took her own life because Sonia only remembers a feeling of being unsafe and speed and spinning, and she has some memories that kind of hit her every so often that are very heightened. So yeah, that I started to think about, Sonia being a traumatized child too. And look, that's often the way, when people turn to addiction. it never just starts there. It's generational overspill. And initially the novel was a terrible title, but initially it was called Overspill, which makes sense because I was playing with the idea of generational overspill, where the addiction starts, who hands it down to who. And little Tommy, I mean, his level of anxiety is so high, he doesn't even know it. And he's only turning 5. And like, he's already fascinated with fire, So I was thinking, that's probably the genesis of addiction in his little body, just all of that anxiety. So if she can break the cycle, while he's so young, then there's hope for him, there's hope for her. But I feel like Sonia's carrying generations of it. Yeah, that's what I felt writing it, that she is not, she is carrying her stuff, her mother, probably before that, before that, before that. Shake any Irish family tree and you're like, whoa.
Oh, that's a heavy burden. Well, thank you, Lisa, for not only putting this story into the world and, um, you know, it's wildly successful to make people feel things, and you certainly made me feel a lot, and I appreciate it so much. The book is Bright Burning Things, and if you have not read it yet or listened to it yet, you're missing out on a profound emotional journey. Just don't expect to be out for a jog with it, right? We'll give it our attention and give it the proper time and space in your life. So don't say you haven't been warned. You're going to feel a lot of things, but it is certainly a worthwhile journey. So Lisa Harding, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Olivia. It's so nice to talk to you.
It is time now for a moment with Margaret, checking in long distance. Margaret is in California, and Margaret, I was even longer distance a few moments ago with Lisa Harding, who is in Dublin, and
Oh,
talking about Bright Burning Things. Now, did you have a chance to read that or listen to the audio?
I have not. I'm not familiar with the book, so I'm gonna have to go back and listen probably
It
or
is
read.
super stressful. It is
Oh,
incredible. And it's one of those books to me that I listened to, and actually we were quarantined in Mexico City, and I was kind of like in a like stressed out state anyways. And I started listening to the audio and I was like, what in the world is happening to me right now? Because I was so anxious. It feels like a memoir, but it is a work of fiction. And you're in the mind of Sonya, and she is basically a manic, alcoholic, single mom frustrated actress who is just like constantly spinning. And it has this it's performed by the novelist who is also an actress. And it has this like really sort of stream of consciousness, like manic, super fast, high speed delivery at the beginning when she's in this sort of spinning out state. And so it's one of those books that you don't want to take in when you're already like stressed out or when you're
mhm.
looking to escape in some positive way, because it takes you in a dark space, and it just makes you really stressed. But it's her ability to write that and put you in her brain is so unbelievably real and effective that it was one of those books where I was like, how can this not be a memoir? Because it just feels like I am in this woman's brain. It's really, really good. I can understand it's not for everybody.
I think the idea that it sounds really stressful right now, I would probably put that one further down on the
Yes,
TBR list.
definitely.
But just hearing you describe it makes me kind of think of Lisa Lippman, or not Lisa Lippman, Laura Lippman's book
Yes.
of like the chaos of a character coming back. What Dream Girl? Yeah, that's what it made
Yes,
me think
Dream Girl.
of,
I
even
love
though
that book.
I haven't read that book yet either. Oopsies.
That's a good
Um,
one.
but in talking about like memoirs, the most recent memoir I read was Crying in H Mart.
Yes.
And, you're talking about a novel that's written like a memoir. To me, Crying in H Mart was like a memoir written like a novel. And it feels very luxurious in a way. She talks so much, the author Michelle, she talks so much about food and family in that book that it made it feel magical in a way, even though it's not always a super uplifting story. And just kind of the reverse of being super stressful. It was stressful in a way, but also very like the food, the love of food was very comforting. It's kind of like an absolute flip, something so different.
Yeah, I feel I know I'm in the minority here, is that I just did not connect with that book very well.
Hmm.
I enjoyed it at the beginning, and I liked it so much that I even read parts of it out loud to Tony because it made me think of his mother who had passed, and sort of the and it made me think of my mom who, when she's talking about the way her mom like does those like constant like backhanded criticisms, but like in this helpful suggestion way. That's how my mom is. Like everything is like basically you're doing everything wrong, or you could definitely look better or do better at any moment in time. And she's gonna give you some idea about that. So I was actually really laughing out loud at the beginning of that book. And I don't know. And then I loved hearing about all of the food. I wish, I think what I wanted was more time with mom in her
Hmm.
prime, like more time on that relationship. But obviously that's not what the memoir was about. The memoir was about
Yeah.
saying goodbye. But it was one of those books that I like stepped away from, went back to, stepped away from, went back to.
I did it as audiobook, and maybe that's why I felt more impacted by it, because she's telling her own story, and yeah, it is about like saying goodbye, but I also felt like the strains of their relationship early in life, and maybe that's why there wasn't more about her being in her prime, because they just didn't have that strong of a relationship at that point, with Michelle being, a rebellious teen and not doing what her mother expected of her, especially culturally and as a daughter. So, and maybe that's why she doesn't really specify that. But yeah, I think listening to it, her voice is really lovely too. So it was like a little gentle little hug, although it's like sad. But
Yeah, that well, anytime a memoir, if you can listen to it, I think that's the way to go. And also, she's a musician, so I would
yeah.
imagine that I would love to hear the audio quality of that as well. And I was like kind of fanning out over her Instagram and her like all of her art and her
Mhm.
photography and the whole like visuals like as a follow up. Is really was really impressive, and I love hearing about the food. I mean, it did make me be way curious about the food.
Yeah, it made me very hungry for
Yeah.
going to an H Mart. In fact, while I've been here in California, I went to my very first H Mart,
Yeah.
and it
I've never
was
even seen
so
one.
fun. I think there's one in Mesa. Don't quote me on that,
Uh-huh.
because I want to say that there was one. Maybe it closed, maybe it didn't. I don't know. There are definitely Asian markets in Arizona, and having gone to Japan, we went looking for Japanese snacks, and we came home with a lot of things, a lot of Korean, a lot of bought a lot of bao, love bao. Bought some gyoza, definitely a lot of chips, like shrimp flavored chips. Really into the
Mhm.
snacks of Asian cultures. It's so fun. So I could picture, and H Mart has like a food court, and so I could picture that, because we sat and had lunch. I had ramen at the food court in H Mart, and thought about that book. Like, this, I can visualize all of this happening. So it felt nice just
Oh,
to
I love.
understand.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing is with travel or having some appreciation for certain cultures, and especially with foods, it all kind of comes to life so much more when you're reading. I just finished listening to One Italian Summer, which
Oh,
comes
you
out
finished it.
March 1st, Rebecca Serle. And I won't talk too much about it because I certainly hope that we're going to be able to talk to the author. I loved this book, but it made me hungrier than I can think of a book making me ever in my life. The way that it was describing the Italian food and just everything, like every fresh, delightful, wonderful, simple plate of mozzarella and tomato, or a fresh plate with, watermelon in the morning in Positano, Italy. It was divine.
That's funny. I'm gonna have to read that. But I felt the same way with, I mean, it was meant to be this way, but Stanley Tucci's Taste, he goes deep on his Italian roots and going to Italy and having different foods. And he does, it's a few recipes here and there, but it was the same thing. I walked away from that book going, oh no, I need pasta. I need some truffle. I need to be sitting with a, maybe in Capri, not Capri, Capri, with a little beverage, maybe an aperitif and some pasta after that.
Gosh, yes, all of
Basking
that.
in the Italian sun. So, and I know Lauren Graham does the audio on that audiobook.
So good. So good. It was just delightful. And I think I was really happy because I hadn't read too much about it. So it was like, it very much surprised me. And I had not read her before. So I actually just had bought a paperback copy of In 5 Years. So I'm thinking about trying to squeeze that in too, just because I really enjoyed this book. I know that you also just finished something else that you really enjoyed.
Yes. It was also an advanced reader copy. It's called For Your Own Good by Samantha Downing. She also wrote My Lovely Wife, which I don't believe I read. And this is a book about a private high school. And there's a teacher. He was Teacher of the Year, he just won the award. And he's kind of trying to teach a lesson to kids that he thinks are like too not condescending, but too fluffed up about themselves. And then just teachers and students start getting sick, and there's some murders, online chatter about the high school being called Homicide High. And it's kind of like a twisting book, like a whodunit, but the main character, all of the characters having some severe flaws, and it was just so entertaining. It doesn't have super high ratings on Goodreads. It's like just under 4, but I really liked it. Like I couldn't stop reading it, and it moved along very quickly. So I loved it. It was just so
For Your Own
juicy.
Good.
For Your Own Good, Samantha Downing. Yeah,
That sounds amazing.
it was really fun. I liked it a lot.
Anything with a little sort of gossip girl element and throwing in some murders along with it. Yes.
Yeah. There's no like dating relationship stuff. It is relationships between teachers, students, and other faculty or parents of those students. And it's ping ponging back and forth, and you get different perspectives. There's something that I actually really enjoyed is you got the perspective of 2 characters, and then another, like a quarter of the way in, you get introduced to another character that's been mentioned before, and then it's their turn, and then you go back to the other 2 characters, and then another character is introduced for a little bit. Like it was never stopping the action, but you were being slightly introduced to new characters or characters that were mentioned already, and it just felt really well done. I enjoyed it.
Ooh.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah. We need some escapism right now.
Yes. But
definitely. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good recommendation. And I do feel that Crying in H Mart is one of those books that it does feel like everybody should read, because it does give you a really nice reflection on that mother-daughter relationship, and also about loss, and about kind of reframing your relationships and kind of what you wish you would have said, and like getting to know somebody in a different way, sometimes the way that you have to, and you can't ask them all the questions you want to.
Yeah. I'm just feeling that out. And it's interesting just to see different people's relationships with their family. And sometimes it makes you reflect on your relationships in your own family. Like I'm very thankful to have a mother that I've always, in high school, being a teenage girl is very difficult with your mom, but like she's my best friend now. Same with my sister. Like I had a very, again, teenage girl, not doing great with sisters, you battle it out, but now also best friend, and just being so thankful to have those relationships. And, when somebody is sick, it brings out a lot of other elements to it, and people react differently. And so just to see that kind of reaction happen makes me reflect on my own family and made me very thankful.
I'm glad to hear that. And that's a very meaningful book. Well,
Mhm.
thank you very much, Margaret, for this moment with Margaret. Two great book recommendations and very different too. So
Yes.
we found something that can appeal to everybody as you're listening and adding to your own TBR list for this early in the year 2022. So many good books coming out. And if you also have something that you want to share with us, you want to make a book recommendation, we would love to start sharing some reader recommendations as well. So let us know, hit us up. How should they message us?
Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com. Send us an email. You can also message us on Instagram. I'm overbooked and overdue. You're Olivia's.bookclub. Message us, tell us. Well, we'll chat about it.
Sounds good. Until next time, thanks, Margaret.
Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. Our editor is Nick Sanchez. You can send us an email with your thoughts or your book recommendations. Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com is the address. And you can check out Olivia's Book Club on Facebook or find us on Instagram. Hello, Bookstagrammers, at olivia's.bookclub. And Margaret is at overbooked and overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music.